Throughout Joseph Stalin's time in power, individuals had a hard time making themselves heard. No one was safe from the persecution of the Soviet Union, especially the artists. One such artist was Dmitri Shostakovich, an accomplished composer and musician. In a highly censored society, Dmitri Shostakovich was able to use music to express his opinions, both for and against the Soviet Union. This ability to express opinions gave power to the individual, in a country that valued the good of the community and never that of the independent. Shostakovich was 11 years old when the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, led by Vladimir Lenin, brought the Soviet Union into existence. At 14, Dmitri entered the Petrograd Conservatory due to his musical prowess.
In the 1920s, as a young man, he was a brilliant composer and won all kinds of awards. And when Lenin was in power, artists were encouraged to explore music from other countries and other styles, and he had a great deal of freedom.
In 1922, Lenin died and Joseph Stalin replaced Lenin as the leader of the Soviet Union. With this change in power came new and harsher laws on censorship. Despite the increased regulations by the government, Shostakovich was flourishing. By the age of 23, he had already started making political statements in his music. His opera, The Nose, of 1928, was described as a strong evaluation of the community in the 1920s, its negligible administrators, cowardly press, and absurd accusations. In the words of Shostakovich, one has to only read this story to see that The Nose is a satire on the reign of Nicholas I. Nicholas I was the Tsar of Russia from 1825 to 1855. Performing a play about Nicholas I in the time of Stalin drew a direct comparison between the two eras, each compiled of drastic censorship and autocratic determination to rule. Despite all of this, his success was short-lived.
When Stalin came to power, one way he came to power was by eliminating his enemies, and he was very shall we say, suspicious of intellectuals and artists.
Stalin ruled with a tight fist. He established a prison camp to eliminate possible enemies, people that questioned his power. It is most well known as the Gulag, also called the Chief Administration of Corrective Labor Camps and Colonies. Most of the Gulag was located in remote parts of northeastern Siberia. Shostakovich was worried about being killed in Stalin's major purge, but his time never came.
And he was a newly married man with a young child, and to be censored like that publicly by the government was very, very scary, because they said he used to sleep with a suitcase packed under his bed because he was afraid that they would come and get him in the night.
Shostakovich planned on writing a trilogy of operas about women. The first opera was called Lady Macbeth of the Minsk district. He never ended up writing the other two. The opera was being performed for weeks around the world before Stalin finally went to see it himself. After watching a few scenes he found crude and inappropriately sexual, Stalin stormed out, not even bothering to see the end. The production was shut down immediately, and Shostakovich fell from grace. The communist newspaper, the Pravda, wrote an article criticizing Shostakovich's work, entitled Muddle Instead of Music. After the document's release, Shostakovich had a difficult time getting any commissions. His salary depleted by 3/4. Nevertheless, Shostakovich didn't let his spirits dwindle. Stalin's censorship inspired him to be ruthless in his response to the denunciation. He made a comeback with his Fifth Symphony in 1937. The Fifth was the first symphony filled with the contrast of optimism and pessimism. The happiness was inseparable from the suffering. The first movement is tense, while the second is warm, lyrical, and relieving. The third movement was a lament for his friend Mikhail Tukhachevsky, a marshal who was murdered during the Great Purge. The fourth movement resolves the tension of the previous movements in a fast-paced march. The fourth movement's triumphant ending is thought to represent Shostakovich's belief that a better world is possible with communism.
He loved his country, and he probably still held the vision of the communists to heart, the idea from the Russian Revolution that the people, the masses, the poor masses, have been unfairly oppressed by the Tsar. and that the original ideals of that Russian Revolution was to raise up the common man and give him more opportunities for culture and economic growth and development.
With his reclaimed status as a composer thanks to the Fifth Symphony, Shostakovich moved to Leningrad. When the Nazis invaded Leningrad in 1941, Shostakovich immediately dropped his current works and began on his Seventh Symphony. He finished the first movement in a surprising 30 days. The second and third movements were also written in the city, while it was being bombed. There were times when he would have to stop in the middle of composing to go out and help others. Shostakovich would be evacuated from the city, and the fourth movement was composed in Kyiv. Shostakovich would never live in Leningrad again. Shostakovich supported his city by joining the Fire Brigade. This earned him the July 20th, 1942 cover of Time magazine. The cover read, "Fireman Shostakovich, amid bombs bursting in Leningrad, he heard the chords of victory." Stalin utilized the Seventh as propaganda, telling the world that Leningrad could never be defeated. Shostakovich's biographer Solomon Volkov stated, "The Seventh is not about Leningrad under siege. It is about the Leningrad that Stalin destroyed and that Hitler merely finished off." This was Shostakovich's most patriotic work, but his good feelings for his government would not last. Shostakovich would be censored again, along with other artists, this time for formalism.
They were accused of formalism. And that's like a sort of a broad catch-all that means that they didn't like the music they were writing.
This denunciation was personal, attacking Dmitri and his family. Most of his music was banned, and he resorted to writing film compositions to pay the bills. After a year of harsh attention, Shostakovich's limitations were eased and the government started to shape him into a nationalist. In 1951, he was made deputy of the Supreme Soviet, the highest legislative body of the USSR. 1953 brought Shostakovich's most heightened moment. He finished composing his triumphant 10th Symphony, and Stalin had died in March. Solomon Volkov determined that the second movement of the 10th Symphony was a direct message, a portrait of Stalin.
And of course the 10th is very famous for the harsh second movement, which according to testimony is supposed to be a depiction of Stalin. And whether you take it as an exact portrait of Stalin or not, it's certainly a portrait of evil. There's no doubt about that.
Shostakovich marked the piece with the insertion of his musical monogram, his initials, D.S.C.H.
But one of the most important aspects of it at the end of the symphony, Shostakovich wins because his initials are put out in the brass in a great triumphant victory.
One can attribute most of Shostakovich's commentary to Testimony, a book written by Solomon Volkov. It is the most direct source to Shostakovich's personal beliefs, though one can assume Volkov's words are not completely exact and biased based on his own personal thoughts.
It purported to be his memoirs, almost as if Shostakovich was sitting there and Solomon Volkov was tape recording what he said. And it seems that may not, most probably likely was not the case.
In reality, Shostakovich was never brave enough to voice his own opinions on the government, except through his music. Music was a safe medium, allowing him to show feeling, but still have the ability to deny any emotions. Dmitri Shostakovich was an innovative thinker in a dangerous country. He used historical events to make his music popular. Now Shostakovich's political music legacy isn't as well known outside the musical world, yet he is amongst the few in the Union to oppose the USSR. Dmitri was both a communist and a Soviet Union dissident.
So Stalin died and Shostakovich didn't. He outlasted him, if you will.
His music gave him the power to be an individual.